Looking at Ruth Benedict's very influential uh, essay. It's actually a section of a larger book, I think, called Patterns of Culture, Anthropology and the Abnormal, where she makes some very interesting claims about the nature of morality and gives some indication of why she thinks so. She has a lot of familiarity with, as an anthropologist, with other cultures, non-Western or non-dominant, you might say, cultures. She talks a lot about the peoples of North America, uh, Pacific Northwest. It seems to be her focus. But what point is she making? Well, one point she's making is that uh, Westerners, Americans, Europeans are arrogant in the sense that we sort of assume that the way we do things is the way that everyone either does do things or should do things, and that this is a result of not having enough familiarity, really, with the variety of human culture, custom, and behavior that actually exists on the earth. Right here on the first page, in the first column, she says, in the higher cultures, and by that I guess she means the advanced industrial Western nations of the time. It's written around the 1920s, I think. The standardization of custom and belief over a couple of continents, and she means Europe and North America, has given a false sense of the inevitability of the particular forms that have gained currency. And we need to turn to a wider survey in order to check the conclusions we hastily base upon this near universality of familiar customs. That is, we live in a certain culture, and you could say that there's not only America and England and France and Germany. There's a set of values that they more or less adhere to, kind of a morality, kind of a shared general morality, and that if we are ethnocentric, we would assume that it's the only morality out there, and certainly the only one that we would say makes sense. But as she's, very articulately says, the very eyes with which we see the problem are already shaped by culture. Somewhere in here, we'll find it. Um, she continues and says, most of the simpler cultures did not gain the wide currency of the one which, out of our experience, we identify with human nature. But this was for various historical reasons, and certainly not for any that gives us, as its carriers, the carriers of, let's say, Western morality, a monopoly of social good or of social sanity. Modern civilization, she means our civilization, the one we share with other similar cultures, from this point of view, becomes not a necessary pinnacle of human achievement, but one entry in a long series of possible adjustments. So, as you can't see Western morality as being, in some way or another, the logical outcome of all human striving for the good, she says you see Western morality as one more entry in a long series of possible adjustments, and the other possible adjustments are other moralities. I mean, it's clear that she is a relativist, um, and she describes. I mean, read it for yourself. It's very challenging, I would say, because she describes these other simpler cultures, the kind that anthropologists of the time would study, and shows that they have different customs. They have different notions of sanity. They have different notions of normality. Um, and in one particular uh, example of the Kwakiutl, she talks about how, in their way of seeing things, when a member of the member of the group dies, for whatever reason, things have to be set in balance by killing somebody else. From the point of view of the, let's say, the American Westerner, it seems crazy, but it certainly makes sense within that culture. It's very challenging. I'm not saying that necessarily have to go along with it here, but she describes cultures where their notions of what's normal, of what's sane, um, are quite different from ours. and that's a great challenge. But I think that we're used to that variety by now. I mean, I think that we're, if not less ethnocentrist than we were 100 years ago when Ruth Benedict was writing. We're at least more aware of that there are other cultures in the world and that they need to be taken into account. Um, so she comes to this conclusion here at the top of page 4. Normality, she says, in short, within a very wide range, is culturally defined. So there's no one normal for the whole human race, which is not that much of a revelation in this day and age. She says normality, is primarily a term for the socially elaborated segment of human behavior in any culture, and abnormality, a term for the segment that that particular civilization does not use. That is, there's all sorts of possibilities that are latent in human nature for different types of behaviors and customs, and each particular culture elaborates a certain possibility, a certain set of limited possibilities, and leaves others. So that when one culture looks at another, that's what they see is some other foreign thing, but something that is really just a matter of history and accident. And to say that there's one elaboration, that there's one particular path that human beings can take, which is the right path, I think she would reject that. But it's hard to see, as she says here. Here's the quote: "The very eyes with which we see the problem are conditioned by the long traditional habits of our own society." That is, she's very important, I think, admission on her part is that it's very difficult to describe the kind of things that she's described in a neutral way, because our eyes with which we see the problem are already, on a perceptual level, already shaping the situation. Some would say that to try to be neutral, or to try to be objective, or to try to be detached, and to recognize your own moral perceptions as simply the ones belonging to your own culture with no universal value, some would say that that's a big mistake. Certainly. Um, so, but it's not such a big revelation to say, well, in different cultures, different things are normal. It's a natural thing in the world. Well, okay, but then we take the next step, or she takes the next step, and says here, it is a point, again, I'm on page 4, it is a point that has been made more often in relation to ethics than in relation to psychiatry. We do not any longer make the mistake of deriving the morality of our own locality and decade directly from the inevitable constitution of human nature. We do not elevate it to the dignity of a first principle. We recognize that morality differs in every society and is a convenient term for socially approved habits. Mankind has always preferred to say it is morally good rather than it is habitual. And the fact of this preference is matter enough for a critical science of ethics. But historically, the two phrases should say phrases, I believe, not phases, are synonymous. That is, it is morally good and it is habitual mean the same thing. Which is just to say that what is morally good is as relative as what is habitual. So that when we say that what's normal is culturally defined, because of the way that she thinks of the relationship between custom, habit, and morality, we're also saying that what's moral, what's good, what's right and wrong is also culturally defined, which is maybe not as obvious and not as simple a thing to agree with as, well, of course, what's normal is culturally defined. But he really is saying what's moral, what's right is culturally defined. Certainly Kant didn't think so. Certainly Plato and Aristotle probably didn't think so. And I don't think Mill thought so either, although, Mill is an interesting case because he does say that at the end of the day, morality comes down to subjective feeling. And subjective feeling, we know, is not just biological, but also culturally determined. So I don't know what the relationship between utilitarianism and Benedict's cultural relativism is, but that would be an interesting thing to try to think out. In any case, it's an extremely interesting piece, and it's not easy in any way. It's not easy to ignore her presentation, you might say. I don't know if she really comes up with arguments, but her account of morality, it's not easy to dismiss it if you are an objectivist, to say, but it's not easy either to agree with her, because the kind of things that she's describing as being normal and culturally approved and therefore good or ethical in other societies can seem really, kind of terrible things. So